right on time. 10011000001011111. In binary, that means well, hello, and welcome back to Pencil to
You just
Pencil.
launched the missile from some
That's
silo in Nebraska.
that's right. Me and Steve have to turn the keys at the same time to launch the live stream. Well, hello, welcome back to Pencil, Live, live in stereo. This is the live cast where you get to hang out with three expert cartoonists and learn all you can about the business of cartooning, illustration, animation, and all things sundry. My name is JAMAR Nicholas. In the traditional book space, they call me an author illustrator. Leon the Extraordinary is my first book in a series at Scholastic under the Graphics imprint. It is in stores now. Cop it if you have not. Leon Worst Friends Forever will be out in stores in May of 2024. Pre-order now, why don't you? I would be remiss if I did not introduce one of our spectacular co-hosts, and you may have heard his name on the winds, whispering on the winds, on Gossiper Wings. Did I say Gossiper or Gossiper? I forgot what I said. Gossiper Wings. You know him as the world heavyweight champion of web comics. His name is Stone Cold Steve CONLEY. What's up, Steve CONLEY?
Hello, guys. How are you? It's good to see you.
Well, hello.
My name is Steve CONLEY. I write and draw the webcomic The Middle Age. Episode 297 was posted on Monday.
Wow.
Getting ever closer to episode 300. You can read it over on Webtoons and Tapas and Go Comics and my own website at middleagecomic.com. And when I'm not doing webcomics, I'm also doing TTRPG content, Intoximancy, Death Dealing. The big shipment of those books is supposed to arrive tomorrow for my lovely Kickstarter supporters, and the upcoming Meta Domain, which you can queue up for now for the Kickstarter coming next month. But I would be remiss, I think. That's the word, right? Remiss?
Word remission, yes.
Yeah. If I didn't introduce the Tower Power, the Man of the Hour, too sweet to be sour, the masked marvel of mark making, Mr. Mike Manley.
Hello, everyone. Now that you've seen my face, you will all die.
That's right. Mike Manley, what do you do?
I do 2 internationally syndicated comic strips, one of which is The Phantom, the other one is Judge Parker, as well as I haunt the byways and flyways of social media, like Johnny Appleseed, spreading my comics to grow future generations of nerds.
As long as that's all you're spreading, Mike.
Well, yeah, I constantly get checked. Just got a good bill of health from the doc, so.
Good to hear it. And you know what? I hope that in Al Gore's internet of 2023, that we're all taking our health very seriously these days. Got to make sure you're on your P's and Q's. Maybe this will be a good way to start out. I want to give a shout out and a get well soon to our comrade Jeff Smith, who suffered some really bad news earlier in the week, but I hear he's recovering, and please send all your love to Jeff out there in the world. And things like that, we're not getting younger, you guys. Makes me think, and I said a little while ago, I was like, you know what, this has to be, and I hate calling years. When you call a year like the summer of George, everything goes wrong. So we don't call the summers. But we've been thinking really seriously about health. Self-care has been a phrase of mine for the past maybe 5 years. And just kind of like doing better for yourself or treating yourself better, I think is a thing that maybe we could all do a little more of. And, and I know, Steve, you've been fighting a little sicky poo yourself.
Yeah, I was under the weather, but about 10 days of being miserable. It's the opposite of that. The opposite spin on that Indiana Jones line. It's not the years, it's the mileage. Yeah, I'm feeling better though. 95%.
Okay, that's all we can ask for. So, I know sometimes when we're sick, and we're not talking about the thing that everybody seems to be talking about, but just like sometimes I look at things like that as getting sick as it's a minute for you to consider slowing down. It's almost like your body saying, "All right, enough already. Go lay on the couch and watch Everybody Loves Raymond reruns for a couple of days. Just get your act together." And I kind of look at it as almost like a, I don't know, like a check engine light for your own body. I don't know how you guys feel about getting sick.
I don't think that's most of the people who watch Everybody Loves Raymond, but I imagine a lot of them are sick.
You become sick after watching it.
I do feel like that. I've been trying to take more time where I'm not staring at screens, or I'm getting daylight, where I'm just moving. And because as I am long out of warranty and I feel it, and just trying to take care of myself so I can keep doing this stuff for as long as I can.
And as a lot of us will attest to, as we're already in this weird little, I don't know, bubble that cartoonists live in. And then you add to it, it's like people don't understand why you're up all night, or you wake up at 3 in the afternoon, or why we going on vacation? Why are you still drawing at it? And like you kind of keep you're your own tempest in a teacup. So I think then when your body shuts down, I don't know if people get a lot of sympathy from their own family, or like, "Oh, well, I told you, you don't ever go to sleep. Why? Of course you're sick." You know what I mean? And that's kind of where I come from with the thing of like, well, I think sometimes that's your body telling you to kind of take it easy a little bit.
It can be, but then you have deadlines, so
Right.
You gotta like last year when I had my my bad event, Brad and Scott Cohn pitched in for me, but the time a couple of years ago when I had an operation on my leg, I was drawing in the hospital right up until they wheeled me in to operate.
Yeah. Last week when I was under the weather, terribly under the weather, I spent most of my time. I think I've lost 10 pounds in the last 10 days. Wow. I just kept I got it for 2 hours. Sweating, would work, and then go crawl right back into bed and sleep for 3 or 4, and then get back up and get back to work. I got some deadlines made during that time. Don't remember them, but I got them done.
Yeah. Well, I think that's one of the things that people don't really understand about being an artist, being a cartoonist, working for yourself, or working for a syndicate where you have deadlines. I mean, if you talk to any of the old guys, some of them work 6, sometimes 7 days a week. I mean, it's a very demanding, especially if you're drawing something realistic, right? You can probably draw a week of Wizard of Id probably pretty quick, right? But
dunking on sometimes.
It doesn't take as long to draw something like that as it does to draw something like the Phantom, where you might be drawing military vehicles, multi-character compositions with lighting, things that are really complicated, right? So if you're drawing a real cartoony thing, you can blast through it, right?
Yeah.
You can blast through it. If you're drawing, it's not going to take you as much time to draw a cartoonist. Especially some of the, I'm talking about like some of the simpler ones. And you can, in fact, it's interesting. So I bought some strips this week. I bought some old Stan Drake strips.
Hold on, let me give you the screen. Are you going to hold them up?
And When you buy these, Mike, where are you buying them from?
I actually bought these from my friend Bob McLeod, who was selling them.
Gotcha.
But one of the interesting things about this, so this is Heart of Julia Jones. So this is towards the end of the strip. Some of these panels are, so here's a strip. I'm going to get a, they started decreasing the size of the strips, right? So here's a strip. Here's 2 strips.
Oh, look at the zip on that. Yeah.
All right. Now he's reusing heads here. He's reusing some of these panels here, like this one is a reuse. So he was actually cutting up his old strips, right? So, and here's one that's a few years older than that. A really nice paper.
Oh, look at that.
See how much bigger that is, right?
Wow.
And then here's another strip that's made up of a couple of strips.
And that's the adhesive is just, the lettering is just going. It's going.
Yeah. So you can see something like that. I mean, just look at that. Look at that bookshelf.
I like how it's covering dude's head. That's why.
Right?
Was that part of the joke of that strip? Like,
I don't know.
Reveal his identity later?
Yeah, I'm assuming that must be why. But if you look at, just like even the drafting on that hallway,
Gorgeous.
Right? The bag of groceries. All right. So it takes a lot more time.
Skeets is not home.
Right. And I think that I know for a while, he supposedly had Tex Blaisdell doing backgrounds for him.
Mike, can you hold another one of those up? I just wanted to mention something about how old is that strip? Like 1,000 years old. And look how crisp that inking is. I mean, just like it's not faded at all.
Old one. So this one is, let's say what it says on here. It says 1985. All right. So this is right towards the end of the strip. After this, he started doing Blondie.
Wow. Right.
He did Blondie, and Leonard Starr, who did the other famous strip, started doing. He did On Stage. Both of them starting in the 50s. He went on to do Little Orphan Annie for several years, making more money doing those strips than they did doing the soap opera strips. And then Stan Drake also supposedly started. Why? I have a cover of mine that he inked, which is just amazing. They both started inking because Al Williamson had started inking at DC and then moved over to Marvel. And so they were like, hey, Al's making like good money. Those guys are making, because they stopped doing their strips because you can see the amount of effort involved in doing a strip. And the pay kept going down. So they started drawing the strips smaller. They started taking their old strips, cutting them up, reusing heads. So I'm just saying, when you're doing something like that, it's very demanding. And you had a pace that was set in the 50s, right? When the strips are nice and big, people were making good money. By the 80s, the bottom had fallen out of the adventure strips. So, but still the amount of effort to do something like that is, even if you're trying to save time by reuse stuff or drawing things, drawing the heads bigger with less background. You have one strip, one panel, with a background, and you kind of nix the backgrounds on the others. Still a lot of work.
Yeah.
So it's much easier to draw. Not that it's easy, right? Not that it's easy to draw Dagwood and make him look, and Blondie and make him look like Blondie, but it's nowhere as difficult or as much lineage, line mileage. If you're drawing the bag of groceries, if you're drawing the same pose with the bag of groceries with Blondie, it's just not as much, you're not trying to light the face, or, it tends to be flatter, so you're not really drawing accurate perspective. All that stuff that requires a lot more time.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, Steve.
I'm not sure. We were talking about the grind. I guess that's where we're coming from. Like, say, like, even when you get hit by a malady, you still have to push through. I recognize that some strips take more time than others. Sometimes I worry that it might come across that we're not shining enough or not showing enough respect to some of the simpler strips, or strips that simply aren't naturalistic. You know what I mean? Having 3-point perspective certainly is going to make life more difficult than the kind of static background of a classic comic strip. But I worry that sometimes we're I don't think there was anything easy about Calvin and Hobbes or
No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that if you're drawing Calvin and Hobbes, it's going to take you less time to draw a Calvin and Hobbes strip than it is going to draw something where you're drawing cars and realistic New York City backgrounds. And it's just, I've done both, right? I've done super cartoony stuff like Powerpuff Girls, right? And so it's not easy, because if you draw them off model, you notice it right away, right? But still, it's not going to take me as much time if I'm drawing two people meeting in a train station with a train coming. You're not drawing anything that's going to take as much to draw the ties.
Yeah, I get that. I just want to make sure we're trying to
be fair.
Yeah, and not slight something, just or to diminish something because we're saying one thing it does have a bit more time associated with it.
Yeah, no, I'm not diminishing. I'm just saying if I got to sit down and draw 7 strips of BC or 7 strips,
Don't say it. Don't say Ziggy.
of draw a Sunday page of Prince Valiant. Right. Okay, it's just I'm gonna win every time, right? Because it's just not. I'm not drawing chainmail, right? It's just like there's a certain, chainmail, Steve. You're very familiar with chainmail, right? So anytime you add detail, it adds mileage, right? And that doesn't mean that one of the things about drawing a cartoony strip is it has to be funny. The stories still have to be engaging. But just simple pencil mileage, like I said, and I've done everything from super cartoony stuff to super realistic stuff, right? So I know how long it will take me to draw a page of Powerpuff Girls or Samurai Jack or Superman Adventures, right?
Right.
Well, I'm still using perspective, but I'm not putting in as much detail, right? That doesn't mean that it's worse or less. I'm just talking about the physical amount of time you have to sit there when you're noodling a background or drawing cars. Like if you're drawing a scene of car chases, right? If I'm drawing something in a very cartoony style, I might not be actually drawing an accurate car, right? I may not be drawing that car in a illustrative perspective. I may be drawing it from the side, right? I find ways of, because of the style, to work. But if I'm drawing you know, Judge Parker and he's driving his Cadillac. I'm drawing like a real Cadillac. I'm not drawing the old like Marvel comic sort of sedan, you know.
Sure.
I mean, you know, I'm drawing like a real
Bar soap with wheels, right?
Yeah. And I just did a car today, right? I just did a car today, and it is cars are something that just even if you simplify it, modern cars especially have all these subtle curves and bevels and things cut in and cut out. You know, it's just takes a while. You know,
Right.
Tom, you know our good buddy America's Tom Zoller. Salute the Colonel. TZ says they're different things. It's hard to be simple because there's no margin for error. It's really easy to draw Batman and have a couple extra useless lines, but there's no margin for error on a pony. And this is a really interesting tidbit Tom just threw out there. Also, a lot of the adventure strips have a separate writer and artist. A lot of the humor strips are one-person operations. So I think that's something that we don't speak a lot about or enough about is the writing component of cartooning.
although some did have ghosts, you know, and I think now I don't know how many of the legacy strips are still done by one person, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like Al Cap's brother used to write a lot of stuff, right? I forget who wrote Stan Drake's strip. Leonard Starr wrote his own strip, but Stan Drake did not write Julia Jones. He had somebody help him with the stories. So, you know, again, the main thing is that when you're drawing a strip, is there's no, oh well, we'll just stick in a strip from 1952, right? You probably could on certain strips, like I always say, like, you know, Croc or Wizard of Oz, because they're sort of timeless. In other words, it's not continuity.
It's
right?
not continuity,
Right. If you're writing something that's in continuity, you can't say suddenly I'm going to stick in a strip from 3 years ago.
Right.
But you could probably take, you know, Ziggy, and you could take a strip from 1970 and run it, and people might not go, oh, well, wait a minute. That doesn't make any sense. I thought they were, you know, going to the Carrot Festival in Coachella Valley, and all of a sudden they made a left turn. They didn't make a left turn at Albuquerque.
So nobody's going to notice those Love Is reruns that you're putting in.
Right, yeah. But I do know that is one of the hiccups that happens with a realistic continuity strip. Is the story
Lockhorns is particularly violent.
Right, yeah. Well, when did the Lockhorns have a goatee? You know, this is those strips where Andy Capp was on the wagon. You know,
y'all are killing me.
You know, I do think most of the guys back in the day did, maybe not Schultz, but a lot of the artists did have assistants for backgrounds. Like many of them never lettered their own strip. You know, and there's a very interesting book I recommend people read. It's called Cartoon County, which is written by John Cullen Murphy's son.
Yeah.
And he talks about that community in Connecticut, Westport, that area, where many of the cartoonists lived. And it sort of lifts the veil behind the comic strip business. And, you know, now you can letter digitally, like I letter digitally, right? And even if I wanted to letter the strips myself, I would add a day, right? If I wanted to get somebody else to letter them, like they used to have a guy that would drive around, would letter a whole bunch of strips, and they would pick them up from a bunch of people, go letter them, and then drop them off. So that meant you also had to be really far ahead, right? Far enough ahead that the guy could stop by and pick up several weeks worth of strips, make his rounds, go back, letter them, then drive back, drop them off. You know, it's ironic because I sort of feel like even though we have technology now, we actually have less. We have not gained any time. We have not gained any time through the use of technology. But so I'm not disparaging people who draw simpler strips. I'm just saying it's just not going to take you as much time to render something like that.
We didn't really introduce what we're doing here, but I think you get it at this point. It's almost 30 minutes in that we're just kind of chopping it up and talking about, the landscape of cartooning and all the things that go into it. Our good buddy from the chat, Jamal Flores, check it in from Facebook. What up, Jamal? Oh, Jamal is part of the King Ghidorah heads of Jamar and Jamal names because no one can tell us apart. So just for the check-in, it's Jamar Nicholas, Jamal Eigel, L. Jamal Walton, Jamal Flores, Jamal Campbell. If you lined us up, I bet you somebody could tell us apart.
And Jamar, the sanitation company.
Oh, yeah. San Jamar.
Jamar, right.
It's in every bathroom across the country. So Jamal says, yeah, could you speak more on the writing of comic strips, please? And it's funny that Tony DePaul is hanging out in the chat, Mike. So maybe we could touch on that. But before Jamal had asked this question, it made me think while we were talking about the old practice of people who sold gag strips. So I'm pretty sure that facet of the business is long gone. But one of my first contacts in comic strips was this guy named Mark Rose, rest in peace. And I met him through newsletters or something. And I think he was a manager, and he kind of managed a couple of people's archives. And he used to be a gag writer, and he sold a lot of gags to guys. And, we had a really interesting conversation, and he sent me a card once. And on the back of it says, oh, that's not important. But he just talked a lot about, you would go from studio to studio with a briefcase and just, hey, I got a couple weeks for you. And the guy was like, no, yeah.
It's like a gag writer for a comedian.
Yeah.
Because people would sell a joke to Don Rickles or something.
Yeah. And there was a really cool image of Joan Rivers before she passed. And she was in this room in her house, and there was almost like Dewey Decimal Library file card cabinets behind her, and they were all jokes. And she said that she still typed out all her jokes and had them indexed by topic.
Wow!
Like there was a heckler drawer, and she pull out a card. You know what I mean? It's fantastic.
I met a guy at Philadelphia Sketch Club 4 years ago now. And he was talking, and he has sold cartoons to the New Yorker. And what you would do is you would go up and you would make the rounds. Back when there used to be magazines,
mm-hmm.
Field and Stream, this, that, and you would have a cartoon for all the different magazines that would run, maybe Sky and Telescope or, Popular Mechanics, or a lot of magazines would have a couple of gags, including all the smutty magazines, right? That was a whole giant market of from Playboy all the way down to, I don't know, like Leg Show or whatever, whatever the lowest rung, porn mag, but they all had cartoons. And so you would go around and you would take your sketch with the joke, and then you would show it to the editor, and they would go, okay, yeah, and then you would, render it up or what. But that's almost all completely died out. The only thing that I guess the thing that sort of stands in for it now, although nobody gets paid, is memes, right? Memes are somebody finds a picture of Willy Wonka. Oh, really? Joke, right?
Mhm.
But that's what a lot of people did. They would make the rounds, and they would go around, and they would take their 30 cartoons and see if I can sell one to, National Lampoon, and one to, the New Yorker, and one to Field and Stream, and one to Psychology Today. But, that's a whole thing. And just, Ladies' Home Journal, and, the further back you go, the more magazines there are.
Mhm.
If you find a picture of a newsstand in the 1940s or 1950s, it's insane the amount of magazines and comics that there were. Just, you can't even imagine that there were that many magazines, and a lot of them would buy gag cartoons.
Mhm.
And I would think that we are probably the last generation of people that will actually know what a gag cartoon is, because I think people coming up now don't really read magazines, so you're never actually going to see that.
Mhm.
Like even the paper, there used to be the one, like Dennis the Menace was a one panel cartoon, right? A gag cartoon, a little. And then they did the Sunday, which was a strip.
Right.
Well, I mean, they're still all over the internet, though, right? It's not going. That format's not going away if people can tell a joke, and the cartoonists are. I mean, 3-point perspective and drawing fancy cars aside, we generally are low energy, efficient. We want to tell our story with as few lines as possible. So, I mean, if you can tell a joke in a single panel, we still do that, and I think it's all over all over Instagram and all over.
Really, you see, you may now, you're.
I mean, 3 or 4 panels is more prevalent, right? But that's always been the case, right? A little more. It's a little easier to build up and pay off the joke.
I mean, I still think that probably younger people don't think of doing a gag as much. Like there's Sarah Smiles, right, who does her
Sarah Scribbles.
Scribbles, rather, who does the usually 4 panels a day, right?
Kind of like Boom Boom, right? It's like
right, yeah, right.
like a grid, right?
But that's still kind of rare. Most people tend to do like a regular comic strip, and I think meme culture, because you have to write first of all, you have to write something that's funny, or you have to write something that the art completes to make it funny, right? Like a lot of times when you look at New Yorker or whatever, I don't think that cartoons are particularly funny, and they certainly are not drawn funny. So the joke is in the writing, right? So a lot of stuff gets, this guy was talking to me, a lot of stuff gets rejected because they certainly don't want anything that would have any kind of like Mad Magazine type cartooning, right? Anything that would smack of anything like that. They don't want anything that looks like that. They actually want their cartoons to actually be kind of crude, right? And I just think that the younger you are, you probably just go grab a meme. I mean, look, you can go on your phone now and you want to find a funny cartoon about spanking, and you just type in spanking and you'll get 50 memes that are clips from movies or whatever. So that is sort of, I think, replaced probably the impulse for the younger you are to sit down and actually to draw a funny cartoon if you can find a funny image that does it for you. Like one of the things are, you see, you go into an office, you would, on the office bulletin board, you would see a lot of cartoons, stuff that was clipped from magazines or newspapers, and they'd write, "Ha ha, Bill," and point, making fun of somebody in the office. And I wonder if that still exists in the way that it used to 20 years ago, simply because of things like the meme culture, right? So do you print out your meme, and then stick it on the bulletin board? But
well, I was thinking about what you're saying, and even office culture has changed. And not even to bring up that cartoonist who shall not be named, who was really successful from doing office strips. But I remember, like, working in offices. Yes, there was a point where people were clipping things out, or it might be on their cubicle, like their cubicle wall, or something like that, or something in the break room. But I think that's even just a different way of communicating now. I don't even think people communicate the same way.
Yeah, I looked at the front page of Reddit r webcomics, and it's tons of 4 panels and single panel comics. I mean, the 4 panels and 3 panels are definitely more prevalent than single panels, but they're still out there. I think they're not getting clipped out and put on the fridge, but they are getting forwarded by your aunt.
you said Reddit, right?
Yeah, the front page, like Reddit r webcomics. It's just a good repository.
I've never gone to Reddit, so
it is a thing where you have to the large signal to noise to signal ratio there, but but there's still a lot of people trying it. I don't think they're necessarily discouraged by the memes, but for all you're probably right that it's probably shaped the style of humor for sure. It's definitely probably snarkier. Hard to imagine snarkier than New York comics. But
this is fine.
Yeah, exactly.
So, and almost a little bit to that point, Steve and Mike, I was thinking about kind of like those kind of, the memes, and also that a lot of this stuff was predicated by the shift in technology and how people started trying to fit and format their comics for Instagram.
Yes.
Right. And, so that carousel style turned into a thing. And then Steve knows the webtoon style of, the vertical scroll, which kind of reminds me of, and, Scott McCloud was talking about this 20 years ago with the Infinite Canvas in Reinventing Comics, that book that was after Understanding Comics. And remember, that was a thing when, we were going to take the whole of a web page and just keep scrolling forever.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So, I think to all of our conversation, I think that, nothing has really died, but it keeps reshaping itself and then kind of going back to the original format because it still works. How many Infinite Comics have you read in the last 5 years?
Right.
And
it's a thing where the finances of it was what propelled people. I mean, the reason they sold all those gag comics was their editors were trying to fill holes in their magazines, and so, or an ad would drop out. We got to fill it with something. Let's look at our archive of available comics to drop in there. And I feel like with that incentive, with the magazines going away, then naturally the cartoonists don't have a way to go there, so they have to find other places to go. And then, kind of with all that bottoming out of that. The incentive, the financial incentive to create comics, you have more people who are kind of hobbyists, and that's what that Reddit r webcomics is, and like people trying to drum up reputations and audiences to build up Patreons and things like that. All of it's a different mechanism, a different way of thinking altogether.
Yeah, I think to me the main difference of it all is that there were fewer places. Even though there were a lot of magazines, everybody went to the newsstand. Everybody saw the same magazines. Everybody, and now what you're talking about is so spread out. Like, well, maybe you don't go to Twitter or you don't go to Blue Sky, but you go to Reddit, or maybe you don't go to Reddit, you go on some other
Tumblr.
Yeah. I mean, it's DeviantArt, whatever. These things are. And they come and they go, they become popular for 4 or 5 years, and then they become wastelands. It's sort of interesting to see what's been happening in the last 3 weeks. My Twitter feed is, but I think a lot of people have jumped to Blue Sky and finally cut their Twitter or X or whatever the hell it is now. And so I'm wondering if what will happen if, or was it the other, the meta
Threads. Yeah, they're spoutable or those.
Yeah, so I think it's still sort of splitting the stream because I'm on Blue Sky, but I'm not on Threads because I'm afraid if something happens with my Threads account, it would definitely kill my Instagram account, right? And so that seems kind of like a dicey thing. So I want to see how that goes. I've already heard or read a couple of people that lost their Instagram account because something happened to their Threads account.
Jeez.
So, but again, it's like how many islands are you going to visit in a day? Okay, I'm going to go to Facebook. I'm going to go to Instagram. I'm going to go to X. Then I'm going to go to Blue Sky. Then I'm going to go to Threads. Then I'm going to Reddit. Then a subreddit. You go to like 20 different places in a day, and I sort of feel like that's probably one of the biggest differences as a cartoonist is you have to sort of spread amongst all these places. You're going to have more followers on one, less on another. They keep changing the algorithms. So you suddenly had a really big audience that now has gone stagnant. So I know a couple people have actually canceled their Instagram and restarted it to try to kick the algorithm, it's definitely a whole different. Because the other thing is that when you were shopping your strips, your wares, you were dealing with an editor. All these other places, you're not really dealing with an editor. You're putting it up there, and you're sort of hoping like somehow your net catches some fish, right? But you weren't dealing with an editor who knew what the audience of your magazine was and might say, well, we can't, that's good, but it's not for our audience. So more like this, right? Which is what a good editor would do. A good editor would say, it's great cartoony, but not funny. Or it's funny, but the drawing is bad. You don't really get that if you're self-curating, self-distributing. You don't get any critical feedback from an editor. You get it from everybody, from the cranks to people who might actually be a fan of your work, maybe some fellow professionals, and a lot of randos, a lot of just people who want to come and piss up your leg,
Yeah, and that might discourage some cartoonists who don't want to be judged. They don't want to post it on Reddit because they don't want to be savaged, or they don't want to put it in those places. Talking about writing for a second, Jamar, were you always? I know you said you like Doonesbury was a big influence. Were you always, as an author illustrator, were you always writing your comics, or did you ever have aspirations of being a penciler, an inker, or anything like that?
No, I mean, but I would very loosely say that I wrote or I thought about things as writing. You know what I mean? I think I'm a very visual thinker, and it's kind of just like, scripting things out visually, and then the words kind of come later. And I never really thought about writing, and that's something that I've been kind of dealing with the past kind of 10 years of like giving writing its space. And I'm not knocking writing. I know it's all part and parcel, but the way that I processed cartooning was the words kind of disappeared magically in the story that I've already started to tell, if that makes sense.
But it was the drawing that was leading it.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely.
Yeah, I think I was talking to Bill Ray about this the other day, and I think probably for cartoonists, we think comics, you think like a combination of images and then maybe writing, but it plays out visually, and the writing is sort of attached to it. Not like you sit down and write, like Stephen King, that sits down and write, and then later on, that's you're adapting your writing into a page or a gag or whatever. And in fact, I'm working on something now, and what I found was it was actually easier for me to dictate into my phone, just write, talk it out, save it, email it to myself, then I can edit it. Because if I sit down and I'm going to write, it somehow discombobulates my visual cortex. Where if I sit down and with this story I worked on, it actually came in a dream, very specific stuff, including whole entire pages and everything. And so I realized that for me, and I was actually talking to Bill because he's working on something. Maybe for many of us, since we're primarily visual first, the soundtrack, let's say, comes along with the visuals. And if you separate the soundtrack, the writing from the drawing, it kind of throws a wrench into the system a little bit. Now, maybe that's just me, and maybe other people sit down and, they get crack their knuckles, and they got their old typewriter with their, they got the things that they like, and they write, and then later on, it's adapted. I heard Frank Miller used to write, I think, on index cards and put them around. So he had all these events or these sequences, and then he kind of like a storyboard, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's how they do with the film. Like you write it as a storyboard, and then you say, well, this is not working. We need to develop this sequence here. So
I remember having, there's been a couple of times in my career where I've collaborated with other people, or somebody asked me to help them with something or some sort of mix like that. And I remember writing types being really frustrated / confused at how I thought. You know what I mean? And I remember sitting on a porch somewhere trying to explain myself to this one dude. And he's just like, yeah, but wait, what? And I was like, well, a lot of times in my head, it's just kind of like Mike said, it's almost like 3x5 cards. You know what would be cool? I have this idea of this would be cool. And then I try to figure out how a story happens from it to get us there. You know what I mean? It's almost kind of like, I don't know, making a sizzle reel for a movie.
Right. And then you sort of backfill it, right? Like
yeah,
connect the big pieces.
Yeah.
All those old pulps they have a cover. Okay, now we have to write a story.
Right.
There's this big inspirational image. And so Mike, when you're dictating, what is that? Is it the trailer of the story? Is it moments? Is it dialogue? Is it description? What are you describing when you're talking?
Actually, it's sort of all of that. Like when it came to me in a dream, there was a lot of stuff that was very specific, which, you know how a dream is. You have stuff that's like, it's It's just like if you were looking at a body, you would go like, oh, the head, the leg, and then like the knee and the foot's not so clear.
Yeah, I think of those as like John Singer Sargent paintings. Like, oh,
Yeah.
that the head's in focus, the hand's in focus, and everything else is just kind of like scribbled, but it's there.
Right. So, what I have come to do is, if you have the broad strokes, I had the framework, then it's sort of like, the way I would explain to my students who are trying to write a story, it's like, if you take a nursery rhyme like Jack and Jill, you go up the hill, there's a mission, they have to do something, a task, hit the water, and then Jack falls down and Jill comes out. So you have conflict resolution, right? So you have the 4 parts of the story: mission, goal, conflict, and then the resolution of the conflict. So if you have the Jack and Jill, why are they going to get the pail of water, right? Why? Where is the pail of water? You know,
It's up the hill.
right. So if you take that framework, right, then you can change up the hill to across the mountain. You can change pail of water to whatever the goal, whatever the goal to get you to the adventure is. And then you have the conflict. So what I found that I did is I would have the major point, and then you backfill. And you're like a reporter, like, well, who is that person? Who do they go with? Why did they go? What do they look like? And so basically that's what I've been doing, is I've been going back and backfilling, adding in, like, some things came in very specifically, like pages, dialogue, sequences. And with me, it's sort of like some of it is actually almost like I'm watching a film or a cartoon, and then some of it are like drawings. There's this weird combination of things. So,
And it doesn't happen the same way twice a lot of times, does it?
well, one of the things that's happened was, so I had my original idea, and now as you're taking it and you're shaping it like clay, you change some of it, or you try to refine some of it. Like originally, I think the characters were older, but now I've made them teenagers. And what I'm trying to figure out now is whether I want them teenagers who can drive, or just before, like when you're
Like learning from
your learner's permit or something. And it's also set in the country. And I know, like, out in the boonies, people drive earlier. You drive your dad's truck. You drive farm equipment. So, and I decided I didn't want any cell phones. So I didn't want it to make it contemporary, because I sort of feel like cell phones ruin drama, right? Because then you have to, because basically what happens, if you see on every episode of Star Trek, they beam down, they've got guns, got the communicator.
You got cell phones.
Something happens so that they lose their communicator, and they lose their
It's an ion storm, Mike. You can't communicate through that.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
The Klingons have come in orbit, Captain. We have to hide behind the supernova, right? So I didn't want to have to deal with that. And so I was thinking, like, when I was a teenager, there's just some things that you couldn't know unless you saw the person, right? Or unless you called the person on the phone, and maybe the phone didn't answer. So stuff like that, right? Which wasn't what I was originally thinking, but as I refine the idea, I can decide, well, maybe I don't want cell phones, right? Because then you have to come up with a reason why the cell phone won't work. Or do you lose the cell phone? Or does the battery die? Or it's just like a whole extra thing,
Mm-hmm. And I've also noticed that part of this trend of doing kind of like 80s stories, or as we call it now, kids with bikes stories.
Ah,
Is because I mean, one, the culture has changed, and there's a whole couple generations of kids who weren't raised outside like us wild animals were. You know what I mean? And can't fathom like
how inhuman were our parents to make us go outside?
well, I mean, like just you getting on your bike and going that way for hours just doesn't make sense, now. But in 1982, it was fun. It was easy.
As a latchkey kid, it was nothing but knife fights the whole time.
You were
My first knife fight.
you were fighting hobos in their camp, right? Yeah, I mean, it's so you have to, every story you have to sort of, I feel, impose certain conditions on it, right? And that might be the thing that makes it interesting, right? That gives your characters things to overcome, because characters reveal through adversity how your character solves a problem, right? Do they lose their temper? Do they cry? Are they confident? Are they overconfident? Right? So as I refined it, or as I am refining it, I just find that for me, just dictating it is better.
Nice.
It works with the way my brain works better than if I was going to just say, like, okay, now I'm going to sit aside, set
You do that every time. I'm going to type. I'm going to put on
put on
my
my
blazer
smoking jacket,
yeah.
my pipe, and like sit there and something about that, sitting there and doing that, disrupts. It's not natural for how my brain plays the story in my head. Right. I'm sure if I was a writer, right, instead of an artist, if I was a writer, that would be the way that I had trained my brain to work. But since I am a visual artist, somehow it's almost easier for me to dictate what I'm seeing in my imagination and then edit that.
Nice.
Or I could just be stupid.
No,
Well,
it's always whatever works. What was that?
Steve, what about you? How do you make this stuff work?
When I write my stories, I start with the ending and I write outlines. I write notes upon notes upon notes. I view it as like the opposite of a multiverse. There's like all these possibilities and you're just winnowing them down until you have, because like how old is your protagonist, Mike? Oh, he's 40. Oh no, he's 16. No, wait, maybe he's younger than that. It's like, and then in your head as you're writing, you're like, okay, I got to write for this guy who has at least been 4 or 5 different ages along the growth of this story. And then you have to, so you can understand why Stan Lee had to make sure everyone's name like had a cadence to it, had this kind of alliteration to it, because he would forget. It was like because I'm sure at one point his name wasn't Bruce Banner, it was something else, and then deadline, it's Bruce Banner, and then I feel like I'm losing track of. I mean, 300 episodes into the Middle Age, it's a story that's gone on 7 years. My characters had different names over the course of those years. The stories rolled out in different ways. It really isn't until much later on in the process that I'm like, okay, I have to go back and create a Bible based on the stuff I wrote, because I don't know it all.
Mm-hmm.
Because all the other variant timelines existed at one point or another in my head, and that was absolutely the way I was going. But as I pruned those and kind of said, oh no, on this day, this is the name of the 2 kids. It's a really fun process, but mine all starts with the writing. But it's sort of like, it's interesting because I'm establishing canon along the way.
Right.
That was a rambling answer. I apologize for that.
No, but I mean, I think all of our processes are kind of rambling, right? I mean, that's there's nothing wrong with rambling, because you have to ramble and then you sort of tighten it up.
Right. You chop it down. Right.
Yeah.
What Shelley says there, does anyone actually make timelines? I didn't do that.
Oh, Jamar X himself again.
Does anyone actually make timelines? And I do. Where I've had to go back and the very complicated plots of characters and which events happened for which things happened first. Where was this character at that time when this other thing was happening, to make sure that all the pieces are in place so that I don't find myself 300 pages later and someone says, wait a minute, that's not possible. You know what I mean? You don't want your readers to outsmart you. Or you don't want to let them down.
Yeah. Well, that's sort of what I'm doing now. Right, I had the big broad strokes, and then I decided, well, I don't want to make it current, and I didn't want to do like a school of witches or special children. I don't want to do that kind of stuff. So I'm sort of like making a specific type of story, maybe an alternative timeline, like an alternative Earth, because you can do anything you want as long as you set up the framework of logic for your universe, so that you don't do what you're saying, where you suddenly have like, oh yeah, well, wait a minute now, where did that guy come from? Why can't they do this? And you brought up an interesting point with the Marvel Universe, because, they were just throwing shit against the wall. Who knew within 2 months whether any of those books were going to be canceled once they got the feedback, right? Kirby, one of the reasons why we have all those beautiful copies of his work, because once he moved to California, he needed copies of all that stuff in order to keep the continuity.
Right.
Even details of the characters wrong. Like, I don't think he always drew Galactus exactly the same. Right? So, yeah, I think everybody's brain, everybody's process is a little bit different. If somebody else writes the story, all that's usually figured out. Then your task as the artist is to figure out how to tell it in an interesting way. Right? Like, so when I get the story from Tony, or I get the story from Francesco, my job is to figure out how to try to tell it in an interesting way. Right. And each writer has a different, like, Tony will give me probably more room than Francesco. Francesco writes more. Like the Sunday I just worked on, the last couple of times, there's a lot of dialogue, right? Mm-hmm. And he likes dialogue. And some writers are like that. They like, like if you look at a Chris Claremont X-Men, there's a lot of dialogue.
Yeah, I've only ever written one script for comics. It was an Aquaman short story that poor Daryl Banks had to draw, and I wrote it like a cartoonist. I overwrote it. I included a layout document. Like, here's like breakdowns. Like, I was awful. I was absolutely the worst kind of writer. Like, just you didn't want me to be writing your stories. I think I came at it as a cartoonist, and no. I think I'm only suited to write for myself, I think.
Well, probably what would happen though is if you were working with somebody over the course of time, you would learn what that person's strengths were or weaknesses were, and you would write to that person's abilities, right? To their talent, right?
Right.
So if you were writing a script for Alex Toth, you would not give the same kind of script to Neil Adams, because they have very different aesthetics.
Right. And I wrote that script not knowing who was going to draw it.
Right.
That was a other missing piece. But I write everything out with an outline. I was really interested. Oh, there's a thing that's going to happen at the Baltimore Comic-Con. I did this in Heroes Con as well. David Peterson runs a panel, organized a panel where we're going to go up there and read our comics. So the artwork's put on the screen, and the other people have done voices. It was David Peterson, it was Todd DeZago and Craig Rousseau. And so we're going to read our comics and do silly voices if we're appropriate. And mine was a bit long. It was like 27 pages of comics. I'm like, okay, I got to cut some of this out. And I was surprised to find out that I have plot on every page. Like there was very little fat to trim. I found 2 pages that were mostly just jokes, but I thought it was really interesting that, at least in terms of the way I write, I have an outline for each page, and each page has to do something for the story. Otherwise I cut it. I'm not sure if that's how you guys structure your stories, but in the end, I'm like, looking back on it later, I have to prune some stuff, and I couldn't, or had a very tough time.
There's a lot of, I guess, voice, or I'm thinking about cadence and page turns.
Right.
That's a big, well, I would assume that's a big thing with everybody who's doing books. It's just kind of like leading your eye out with something interesting to make you turn the page, and I think sometimes that's understated in some people's work.
I think, again, that's the benefit of working with an editor who has experience, because they would say, take this, move it here. It'll make better sense for your story, right? Because you take somebody like Archie Goodwin or Roy Thomas, guys who written a lot of stories. They would help a writer or a writer artist. When you're doing it all on your own, you may eventually figure it out, but you don't really have the sounding voice. You don't have an independent voice that can look at it with a historical knowledge and the formal knowledge of the format of comics, right? That's what we really miss in a lot of cases now, because that whole generation of people kind of, they've gone on, and you don't have people, not many now have 20, 30 years experience being editors, right?
With the story you're writing, Mike, are you going to bring an editor in, a sounding board?
Probably what I planned on doing is, once I had it all finished, I would run it past a few people I know, just to get their feedback, what they thought of it.
JAMAR Nicholas.
JAMAR Nicholas, I know he'll hate it, because he's such a good.
Where's the red pen?
He's say, what is this? He'll just delete that email as soon as he gets it. And you have to also be willing to. That doesn't mean you necessarily agree, right? Sometimes you might feel really strongly about something, but I do think it's always good to run it past. It's something I advise younger artists all the time, because you hypnotize yourself writing the story. You know what you want to say, but that doesn't mean that you're actually saying clearly that what you said you wanted to say, right? And it may not be very clear at all. It's really, that's very often the case when you're younger, right? And you don't have the experience of how to structure things. I've been doing this a long time, 40 years. So, what I'm looking for is like, does this make sense, or should I take this thing out? And also I'm sort of aiming it at a young adult audience, not Dogman type people, but a little bit older teenagers, like people that might like Stranger Things and things like that. So I know that 95% of the people who like my work will not be interested in reading it, because if you just like superheroes, this is not a superhero thing.
And Jamar, with your Leon books, are you writing out an outline? I mean, I know you're starting with an outline, but do you do page by page breakdowns of the story? How do you approach that?
Well, the thing that I've kind of developed for these is I'm calling it a visual script. So I'm basically laying out thumbs for the entire book along with the dialogue. And inside my word balloons on the thumbnails might be, you know, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then you refer to the script, you know, Leon 1, Clementine 2, Leon 3, you know. So I'm not necessarily lettering it. We're not going that far, but at least, you know, an editor could look at it and follow along with everything in one document versus having, you know, a PDF of thumbnails and then a PDF with a script, and you gotta, you know, juggle your screen real estate trying to read both of those things. That drives me crazy. You know what I mean? So I wanted to try to develop a way that it could all just be in one place.
That's great.
Yeah.
And how do you, with such large stories, with such each volume being, well, is there a an overarching narrative between
from book to book to book? Yes. Yeah.
And in the single volume, how do you plan the story? Do you think of it as acts? Does it follow a movie kind of model where you have the?
You know what? That's interesting because when I was kind of plotting everything out, I kind of set up a wall in my studio, kind of like a writer's room board with Post-its and, like, you know, 3 acts.
Okay.
And that at least kind of gets me started. And there's also no chapter breaks in my books, so it's just like one continuous thing, and that's sometimes I think that's harder than it sounds. Rather than
Yes, for sure, because the chapter break lets you switch scenes with the same people. You get to suddenly be sitting in the cafeteria. Next thing you know, new chapter. They're home. You don't have to. Otherwise, you're like, how do I write that? How do I?
And just like something else that I've been doing, just that I'm thinking about it, is there's not a lot of kind of like caption boxes like "meanwhile" or "next week," you know. So I'm doing like subtle things like now it's fall because there's leaves falling or the trees are getting naked. You know what I mean? So it kind of pays off if you pay attention.
Do you write that down? Autumn comes to our humble city.
Our humble bird.
Trees as the trees get naked.
That's our sleepy bird. No, but it's all kind of cerebral. You know what I mean? And I believe people can follow along, but I think that's one of the things that I haven't thought too much about, but has been a truism. I don't do chapters, so it's just one long running story inside the book.
Yeah, I think you're sort of not. The whole thing was not, even from the beginning, you weren't really thinking of like chapter 1. You know, Leon gets chapter 2 meets chapter 3. You know, I mean, I suppose you could do that, but you know.
It feels very like staccato. It feels like you keep stopping and starting and stopping and starting, doing it that way. Not, I mean, you know, people have been doing that since the dawn of time, but I think with me, it's just kind of like it's a roadblock. You know what I mean? And I've been reading a lot of other middle grade books, and they kind of lean on chapters, and even sometimes the actual art on the chapter page is a storytelling element, which I think is a great way to use that rather than chapter 6. Like maybe there's like a refrigerator with magnets of a road trip on it, and then it goes to you know what I mean? I think there's cool ways to do it, but I think my stuff flows better without
Note to self, chapter with refrigerator and map to secret lair. Thanks, Jamar.
Wait a minute. So,
go ahead. I mean, maybe it's like that's not your storytelling rhythm, because everybody has a rhythm. Like if you read a Jack Kirby comic, all of his comics have a rhythm.
Yeah.
Right? You feel a rhythm if you read a Kirby comic or a Frank Miller comic or probably an Alan Moore comic, right? There's a rhythm to how their stories flow, and there's a rhythm to 22 pages, right? It's like you perfect that rhythm so that when you get to the end of that issue, either it propels you into the next issue, right? Or, it's ta-da, the end, right?
Right.
And so it's sort of, it's like writing, or it's like if you watch a Warner Brothers cartoon, 7 minutes, right?
Right.
Perfect for that 7 minutes, right? Whenever they take those characters and they make, we're going to make an hour, we're going to make 90 minutes.
Space Jam.
Right. It just doesn't work. It does not work. When you take those characters and you stretch out that joke to where it's like, and we're going to add all this stuff in, we're going to add this, and we're going to add that. To me, it just always ruins the perfection of that 7. It's like the Twilight Zone. Perfect at a half an hour, right? Now let's make a movie of the Twilight Zone. That's a whole different rhythm, right?
Yeah.
There's something so sweet about like the perfect joke, like a Warner Brothers cartoon, right? You have to set up the conflict, whoever the characters, I want to eat the bird. This guy's trying to kick me out of my house, or this person's trying to steal my gold, right? Then you have those little things right up to the punchline. When you take that and you go, okay, I'm gonna take the sandwich, this perfect deli sandwich. Now I'm gonna wrap it in a pizza. Now I'm gonna, put it inside a duck, and I'm gonna put that inside of a pig, and it's like you stretch it out to where it's like you don't really keep the flavor.
Speaking of that, have you heard of this? This is like, I don't know who's doing this out in these streets. It must be tourists. Have you heard of the Philly taco?
No.
So the Philly taco is when you go to South Street and you get a whole pizza, and then you put a cheesesteak inside it and you wrap it.
Then you go to Jefferson and get your stomach pumped.
It's a cheesesteak wrapped inside a pizza.
Wrapped inside a heart attack.
That sounds pretty awesome. So what would you do? Would you like
slice
it up and eat it like
No, you just house it. You just take it to the head. But don't do that.
Yeah.
Don't do that at all.
Right.
It was interesting. Shelley just mentioned talking about these long form Looney Tunes vehicles. She mentioned that Roger Rabbit is way better than Space Jam. We won't start a culture war in the chat, but what I brought this to some of the guys' attention a couple weeks ago. I think it was Floyd Norman or somebody shared these old strips that at one point they tried to make a Roger Rabbit comic strip.
Yeah. And it never flew.
And it didn't fly. And they kind of almost like, what is that? Like, not Fumetti? Is that it? The Italian comics where there's like, live action pictures like pasted into the strips.
Right.
And they tried to use like human actors inside the strip. And, the cartooning was really fantastic, but the whole thing just fell flat. And I guess it just, died on the vine. Like, how are you going to keep that continuity going?
Right. Well, I think that's an example, a perfect example. No one ever talks about Roger Rabbit. They talked about it at the time because it was 2D, and they put all the other different characters in it, but it's really not a very good or very funny cartoon, even though there's some nice animation. I don't feel that he was a likable character. What was his character? What people remember is Jessica is his wife, right? Mm-hmm. That's what they remember, and that's what people still cosplay. That's the thing that came out of that. You don't ever see people going around dressed as Roger Rabbit, or actually even drawing Roger Rabbit, but you still see Jessica Rabbit, right? And I think it's because he was not a relatable, he wasn't a likable character.
Well, he was supposed to be kind of be like a mashup of like Woody and Bugs and all these major kind of short stars, but I don't know.
I think it was also a one-off. It was just a
right.
Was there a Saturday morning cartoon?
I don't think so.
No. I mean, there was merchandise, but maybe to both of your points, I don't think there was an idea to make Roger Rabbit the next Bugs Bunny. It was a movie. It did well. Let's move on.
Well, the thing, once they perfected Bugs, was sort of the everyman, and what Bugs never started trouble. Somebody was always trying to do something to him, and then he would outsmart them, right?
Mm-hmm.
But can anyone say what Roger Rabbit's personality was? He was just kind of spastic. Sort of like Woody Woodpecker, Like I never liked Woody Woodpecker, I just always thought he was spastic and annoying, but not enjoyable.
He was a jerk, like the early Woodies, where he was just like out of his mind,
right?
And then the newer ones where he was just more like a jerk face.
Woody the jerk face, yeah.
If Woody had called the police, none of this would have happened.
But yeah, I mean, I think there's a reason why we still remember those cartoons, because that format was perfect. They were also written on the level that they appealed to adults because they were shown before major movie releases, not just shown for little kids, even though kids enjoyed them. And I think we really sort of forget that.
Yeah, I was just telling some young people about that. Like, you saw those shorts at the movies before the feature started. And, also there was, like war propaganda and all that other kind of stuff that was going on before the movies, rather than 20 minutes of really crappy previews that you get now where they spoil everything in the trailer. But
right.
That's a whole other conversation.
I just posted tonight on my wall part of a Witch Hazel cartoon.
Witch Hazel?
Right. And at the end, she drinks the potion and turns into a hot chick and flies. And then the genie that's in the mirror, goes, wow, wow, and like starts chasing her, right? Tries to grab her, start chasing. Totally inappropriate in today's world. But that's the kind of thing that would make adults laugh back in the day. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And maybe little kids wouldn't really get it. Like, oh, they know she turned into a pretty girl, but they wouldn't. There's that whole other level that they would have, right? Mm-hmm. Like Pepe Le Pew, like you can't show Pepe Le Pew now because it's just like.
Well, Pepe got canceled.
Yeah,
Pepe Le Pew got
way too rapey now. You can't show like his guy is just like so love struck that he can't control himself. It's like no, they can't. They can't. Although they're beautiful cartoons. There's a lot of beautiful designs and animation in it. But yeah, the culture would not accept Pepe today.
Before we cut bait, there's a interesting conversation happening, and a question by Chris Lopez from Facebook checks in, who says he's been a long time watcher. Nice to see you, Chris. Chris asked, when we're talking about writing for yourself and drawing cartoons, and you're the writer and the artist, is the Marvel method more ideal for cartoonists when writing for themselves? And I started to go into that in the chat a little bit about like the whole idea of having this plot style method was because there's a team happening, where one person is trying to translate an idea for somebody to draw it. And when you're doing both, I don't necessarily think that you have to write things down. It really depends on what works for you, like we've been talking about all session. But I don't know if you guys have any opinion on that.
Writing, not that I've done a ton of writing for myself, but in the beginning of my career, I worked for DC, and so everything was a full script. And then I worked, so like every panel, every page, all the dialogue, and then you had to sort of like, oh, well, I got to make this all fit. Oh, I wish I had more room here, whatever. I think, especially for comic books, especially for action, their Marvel method is the best because it allows the director, right, to play to their strengths as a storyteller. And in my experience, a lot of the writers were not great at being able to stage the action. They would have an idea for the action and have an idea for the broad strokes, but it worked better if you then said, okay, we're going to work this all out, and then they could script to it, right? Because there's some stuff you don't need to explain in words, you can see visually. Right? Working with Tony, it's all full script, but as long as I put all the dialogue in, I could take a panel and make it 2, or sometimes I will take a panel and make it 1. Like I do that more with Francesco because he'll have, if you see a Sunday, you will see there's a long panel at the top, 2 middle panels are the same size, and then the bottom tier might be 3 panels. It could be 1 panel, but that's the tier that you can make different panels. You can have 3, 1. Sometimes he would have a panel of somebody talking, and then he would have another panel of somebody, the person they're talking to, also talking. I would combine it so that they're talking and you see them talking to each other.
Right.
Because to me, what's really important is the connection between the characters. So if you just have a head dialogue, another head dialogue, another head dialogue, I feel like you lose the connection. I could probably do something here. Let's see.
And I'd say that the full script is written before the art can be seen, and so that's generally a challenge for. I mean, I basically work with the Marvel method myself. I mean, I have notes for dialogue. I've got notes for exact punchlines that are going to land a certain way. Dialogue I know that I want the characters to say, but when you see the drawing, it helps you. Well, I like having the script because when the characters are talking, they can be representing the exact words that they're saying. I want you to understand what they're saying while they're saying it. So what they're saying is really important because of how they're posed, the gesture, their hands, all that stuff. But I want the ability to be able to rewrite it when the artwork's done because maybe I want to tweak the dialogue. Maybe I don't need to underline something because it's super clear in the artwork. I feel like all those early first scripts are so repetitive because they couldn't trust the artist to tell the story right. Look at him. He's picking up that boulder and he's picking up a boulder. It feels like you just couldn't trust the artist to depict it right.
Meanwhile, at the Hall of Justice.
Right, and it's the Hall of Justice. But you're like, you don't know who the artist is.
Mike, what are you doing over there?
I'm going to share my screen to show you something.
Steve, you want to get that?
Yes, I do.
So this is this week's Sunday, or an upcoming Sunday. And so you see, like, you have the 3 tiers, right? And then so you sort of have this, what I feel is like a beat between the daughter and the mom, and then she sees her mom. April sees her mom, who's a spy, had gotten in her car. All right, again, a connection.
Can you magnify that once or twice, Mike?
Let's see. Is that
Perfect.
okay? So what's important is the connection between the character. So even when you have this shot of the car, them leaving, you still maintain this connection between the characters, right? Then you have the final big close-up of her mom. To me, that's really important, is to see the characters looking at each other, right? And this is one of the big differences between film and comics, because film, you might have her walking to the car, and then her looking in the car, and then the window rolling down, and then maybe you see her as the window rolls down, you can see your mom, and then maybe you have a shot from inside the car looking at April outside the car. Then April would get into the car, right? You would have a lot more shots of going back and forth. In comics, you have very limited real estate. So actually in the script, he says she gets in the car. That is a really awkward thing to draw. Someone getting in or out of a car. It's something that many writers I've worked with over the years have written, but drawing someone like half in
with their butt hanging out the car, yeah,
it's just like that is a really bad shot, right? That just did. Even if you got somebody to stand in the car or whatever, it just looks really awkward, right? You accept it in film. It works in film, right? So it's better, and in this case, because there's a fair amount of dialogue, and I want to see her expression connecting to her mom, she's already in the car, and you can kind of see a little bit of the door open, right? So there's a lot of choices that you have to make in a comic strip that you wouldn't make in a film, because you always accept things in live action or in reality that don't translate as well to a drawing.
Okay.
Right? And so to me, that's an example of one of the big differences between comics and film. And I see that very often where, I would say the last 20 years, people imitate, and comics try to imitate film. And I don't think that's always a good choice for making good comics, because they're so very different. I was looking the other day at a Steve Ditko Spider-Man, and it was him and the Green Goblin. And it was a down shot of New York City. And it was a Ditko New York City. And one of the things I really liked about it is because it wasn't real, but it was real in the context of the way that he draws things, his visual language, just like Kirby had a visual language. So when he drew New York, it didn't look like he went and took a picture or found a picture, put it in the autograph, and traced it down to make it look real. Part of the beauty of that is that his whole visual language was consistent, right? That is something that comics can do that film can't. You could do it in animation, but you can't do it in live action, right? And so, that's why those old superhero films, those old TV shows, when they show Spider-Man, going up the wall, and they've got like a hook, and they're pulling the stuntman up the wall, it doesn't look right. Now they've taken billions of dollars to do all these effects to try to get the effect of making the stuff realistic. And, and it's good, but it still, to me, is weaker. It's not as personable. It's more generic. One of the things we like about artists, like you might like about Frazetta, or you might like about Boris, or Joe Jusko, or Mike Mignola, when he draws his Hellboy, Jamar Nicholas, he draws a hall monitor, it doesn't look like a real hall monitor.
Right.
That is the strength of cartooning. Complete voice of the artist to shape a world. And I feel when comics tries to imitate too much reality or too much the influence of cinema, it weakens what comics does best.
Totally agree.
I like it. Let's end there.
I love it.
That was fantastic. This is the sweet nougaty center of what a fly on the wall conversation between comic book professionals sounds like. You guys have been soaking in it for an hour and a half. I hope you like that.
Pruny cartoonist flesh.
That's right. What's up, Amani? Yeah, I agree. Guys, I like this new format that we're doing when we don't have a guest. We're just going to keep doing parts. What is this, part 9?
Part 47A.
Part 40.
Insert into next week's tab B.
And, also I think what I like about this, and maybe the chat can agree or disagree, I like how lo-fi this is. We're just talking, right? We're just talking. I think the conversation has flowed really nicely. And we've been steered a little bit through the conversation by the chat. Some fantastic questions, and it's good seeing some people that I haven't seen in a while show up. Thank you so much. Also, on our way out of here, Eternity Forever has been quoting pages from Joe Kubert's comic book studio instruction book. Have you guys heard of this one? I missed that one. And we're talking mainly about how Joe was saying that, drawing and comics are 2 parts. And he goes, I have a Joe Kubert book. He explains that you, the royal you, should always write a script first and separate before drawing if you're working alone. Those are 2 jobs. I thought that was interesting.
It is. I mean, again, especially for people, the younger you are, that's really important, right? I think once you get to a point, it becomes like synergy, right? You do what you do. You know when to add the eggs, you know when to preheat the oven, you know how to do all the but in the beginning, it really is like following a recipe, right? One of the biggest mistakes students make is they start doing something before the story is done. So start out like a house of fire, you get to page 5, I'm really not sure what's going to go on here, but I'll skip ahead, draw dudes fighting or blowing some shit up or whatever, the exciting part. And then you got to go back and oh, well, now I've sort of put myself in a hole because this doesn't make sense anymore, or I need more room for my dialogue. I should have had another panel here where I could have had the wizard explain something. Part of it is impatience. Part of it is the fact that you haven't done enough of it. You haven't drawn 100 pages of comics. You're like a newborn baby, It's really through that repetition of even more important than drawing, it's the layout process, taking the script and laying it out, right? Because finish, it can be cartoony, it could be realistic, whatever. Taking that script, which is abstract, and laying it out visually, that is the most important, the most crucial part of comics. It lives and dies right there. It can be beautifully rendered, but if it doesn't work, it's not going to be effective. That's why in the beginning, when guys would come to Marvel, Stan would have Kirby lay out stuff. He did it for Buscema. He did it for Romita, right? So that they would get, oh, okay, this is what a Marvel Comics is, right? This is how our visual storytelling works, right? The dynamics, the flavor that we want. And both those guys had been in the business for, I think, 48. So when they're in the early 60s, they've been in the business 15 years, right? But Stan still had, he did the first issue of Iron Man. Don Heck finished it. But he got the chief architect of the Marvel Universe to lay out the pacing, right? So that what Joe talks about is very important while you have your training wheels on.
I like it. And we're getting out of here, you guys. We're getting out of here. But Amani, my man, Amani Latif. Amani says, is that a goal we should shoot for, you guys? 100 pages? And I just put in the chat, kind of like the 10,000 hours of mastery we talk about a lot. I think that once you crack 100 pages, you're starting to figure things out.
Mm-hmm.
That's the start.
When I went back to school for painting, my teacher said, you got to do 300 bad paintings. Every artist has 300 bad paintings in them.
I could double that. I could.
Right. And it was true, because part of it is you just gotta, in sports, what do? You practice 5 days a week to play a 1 hour game. Right? When I played football or when I was wrestling, or I practiced 4 or 5 days a week to play a 90-minute game. So you practice more than you actually play. And why was that? So that when you were playing and they go, hut, 42, 40, you knew that you did this and the fullback did this and the guy over here went and blah, right? That we have no problem with that in sports. Same way with playing music. How many hours a day did you practice piano or guitar or violin? Right? We don't have a problem with that. Somehow we want to skip that with drawing. Like, what, Mom? No, Jimmy, you do your layouts. You do your layouts after, before you get to watch YouTube. I want to see 6 pages.
The belt.
Yeah, I want to see 6 pages, Jimmy.
The switch.
Enough. Let's go home, guys. This was fantastic. Thank you guys for hanging out with us. We will be back here, Al Gore willing, next Wednesday at 8 p.m. EST. Because remember, the internet.
You didn't do pages.
Remember, the internet is not a large truck. It is a series of tubes. I'm JAMAR Nicholas for my co-hosts. This has been Pencil to Pencil. Thank you so much. And guys, just keep drawing. That's all we ask. You got to get those 100 pages out of you somehow. So, all right, you guys, I would be remiss. We would be a deep remission if we did not ask you guys to always continuously wash those Kirby hands.
I saw a picture of Jack tonight doing this.
Really?
Yeah, on the internet. I saw a picture of Kirby.
Oh, that's lovely. We got to find that. That'll be our mascot. All right, guys. See you next week.
Right. Night.